I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two that Tuesday afternoon. One moment, I was driving home through suburban Denver, rehearsing how to tell my husband that I had just been fired. The next, I was standing frozen in the doorway of our bedroom. The woman who destroyed my career pressed my naked husband into the bed we had chosen together. For the sake of this story, I'm Jane Morrison. I was 34 years old, a software engineer, married for 3 years, responsible, careful. The kind of woman who planned budgets before vacations and believed that loyalty was still worth something in marriage and business. That day, I had been fired without warning. Rachel Davidson, my boss, had smiled politely while ending my career with corporate buzzwords like budget cuts and streamlining operations. She didn't even look at me while doing it. 3 years of 60-hour weeks reduced to a cardboard box and a forced walk past coworkers who pretended not to see me. I drove home terrified, calculating mortgage payments in my head, wondering how I was going to sit across from my husband and explain that everything we had built together was suddenly fragile. I never got the chance. The bedroom door was half open. The sound reached me first. Familiar. Wrong. Intimate in a way that made my stomach drop before my brain could catch up. They didn't scramble. They didn't apologize. My husband barely looked ashamed. Rachel looked amused. And when I stood there, unemployed, humiliated, still holding a folder containing a $25 million medical technology contract I had received that very morning, I realized something far worse than infidelity was unfolding. This wasn't an affair. It was a plan. Later, I would learn that for more than a year, my husband had been feeding Rachel everything about my work. My ideas, my schedules, my breakthroughs, my weaknesses. They weren't just sleeping together. They were stealing my life. And as legal documents slid from my hands onto the hardwood floor, contracts worth more than either of them could imagine, I understood one terrifying truth. They thought I was finished. They were very wrong. Before everything collapsed, I thought my life was reasonable. Not perfect, not glamorous, but solid. I was 34, a software engineer based in Denver, the kind who preferred quiet weekends and well-organized code over loud parties or big social scenes. I liked structure. I liked knowing where things stood. I believed that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and showed up consistently, life would eventually meet you halfway. That belief shaped every major decision I made. I met my husband, Daniel Lancaster, at a technology conference in Boulder 6 years ago. I was presenting a small demo on logistics optimization. Nothing flashy, just a side project I'd been quietly refining. Daniel was working in public relations for a startup that specialized in brand storytelling for tech founders. He was charming in a calm, polished way, attentive, curious about my work in a way that felt validating, especially in rooms where women engineers were still treated like anomalies. We talked for hours that first day. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into months of steady dating. Daniel liked that I was grounded. I liked that he made things feel lighter. When his startup folded 6 months later, I didn't panic. I helped him revise his resume. I encouraged him when he said he wanted to find something better aligned. At the time, that felt like partnership. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony, nothing extravagant. We bought a house in Highlands Ranch soon after, a decision that looked sensible on paper, but quietly tightened the financial noose around our necks. A heavy mortgage, 2 car payments, the constant pressure of pretending we were more financially comfortable than we actually were. Still, we talked about the future, children, stability. Once things settle, Daniel would say, once we're really secure, I believed him. At work, I had been at TechFlow Industries for 3 years, slowly building a reputation as someone reliable, but not loud. I didn't self-promote well. I let my work speak. On nights and weekends, using my own laptop, my own equipment, I began developing a logistics AI system, something powerful enough to predict supply chain failures before they happened. It wasn't assigned, it wasn't requested, it was mine. I told Daniel everything. Every late night, every breakthrough, every frustration when an algorithm refused to converge. I trusted him with details I didn't even share with colleagues. Around that time, my manager, Rachel Davidson, began taking an unusual interest in my work. She was polished, intimidating, always impeccably dressed. The kind of executive who spoke about innovation while quietly positioning herself at the center of every success. Daniel started mentioning her casually. Rachel asked about you today. She seems really impressed with your dedication. She says you have real potential. I didn't think much of it. Looking back, there were signs. Daniel suddenly working late when he didn't have a job that required it. His phone always face down. A new wardrobe that didn't match our budget. A distance in his touch that I explained away as stress. And my relationship with his parents didn't help. Harold and Patricia Lancaster came from old Denver money. They were polite but never warm. They smiled the way people do when they're tolerating something temporary. I always felt evaluated, like I was a resume they hadn't approved. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself marriage required patience. I told myself loyalty mattered more than suspicion. That was the version of me before everything fell apart. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as inconvenience, stress, and the normal wear of adulthood. Daniel started coming home later than usual, always with an explanation ready before I even asked. Networking events, informational meetings, just one more drink with someone important. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes rarely met mine when he said it. At first, I didn't push. I was buried in my own work. The AI system was entering a critical phase, and my evenings blurred into lines of code, half-finished dinners, and cold coffee forgotten on the counter. Still, patterns began to form. He stopped asking about my progress, even though he used to hang on every detail. When I tried to share something exciting, a breakthrough that had kept me awake until 2 a.m, he nodded absently and changed the subject. His phone buzzed constantly, always silenced, always turned away. One night, while folding laundry, I noticed a suit I didn't recognize. Not mine, not old, not cheap, I asked casually, holding it up. Oh, client thing, he said too quickly. Rachel suggested I dress more executive. Rachel. Her name started appearing everywhere. In conversations, in excuses, in places it didn't belong. At work, the atmosphere shifted too. Rachel Davidson began avoiding me in meetings. When she did speak to me, her tone was oddly distant, like she already knew something I didn't. My project updates were suddenly questioned in ways they never had been before. Requests for documentation, vague comments about ownership and alignment with company resources. Once, during a team meeting, she dismissed my optimization model as premature, despite praising the same logic weeks earlier. I started doubting myself. At home, Daniel grew critical in subtle ways. He commented on my work hours, on my obsession with code, on how I was always tired lately. Maybe you should slow down, he said one night, not unkindly. You don't want to burn yourself out. The irony makes me nauseous now. His parents also began calling more often. Patricia asked pointed questions about our finances, about my career trajectory, about whether Daniel was being supported enough. I felt like I was under review. I tried to talk to Daniel about it. Really talk. I feel like something's off, I told him one evening. With us, with work, with everything. He smiled, soft and reassuring, the way he always did when he wanted me to doubt my own instincts. You're overthinking, he said. You always do when you're stressed. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the growing heaviness in my chest was just exhaustion, not intuition screaming to be heard. Because admitting the truth, that something was being built behind my back, would have meant admitting that the person I trusted most might be part of it, and I wasn't ready for that. The day everything broke open started like any other Tuesday. Cold, ordinary. predictable in the way routines lull you into believing nothing truly catastrophic can happen before dinner. That morning, I had received an email that made my hands shake. Not with fear, but with disbelief. A licensing offer from Medical Technologies. They wanted my logistics AI. Not a prototype, not a pilot, a full North American deployment. The numbers were unreal. $25 million for the initial contract alone, with expansion clauses that made my head spin. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, afraid it might vanish if I blinked too long. I printed the documents, slid them into a folder, and placed it carefully in my bag. I planned to tell Daniel that night. I imagined the conversation on the drive home after work, how I'd start gently, how I'd frame it as our win, how maybe this was the moment everything finally balanced out. The mortgage wouldn't feel like a slow suffocation anymore. The future we kept postponing might finally arrive. But I never made it to that conversation. At 10:30 that morning, my calendar alert popped up. Meeting with Rachel Davidson. No agenda, no explanation. Her office was all glass and steel, open enough to look transparent, private enough to be untouchable. She didn't offer me a seat. She didn't waste time. Due to restructuring and budget realignment, she said, eyes fixed on her screen, your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. I didn't understand the words at first. They slid past me without meaning, like a language I almost recognize. What? I asked quietly. This isn't personal, she added, still not looking up. Security will escort you out. That was it. 3 years, 60-hour weeks. Sacrifices I had justified as temporary. Gone. I walked out with a cardboard box and a smile that felt surgically attached to my face, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed. I drove home in a daze. I parked in the driveway of the house I was still paying for. The house Daniel and I had painted together on weekends. The house where I thought I was safe. The front door was unlocked. That should have been the first warning. I stepped inside, calling his name out of habit, already rehearsing how to say, I lost my job, but something incredible also happened today. I never finished the sentence. The bedroom door was ajar. The sounds reached me first, familiar enough to register, wrong enough to freeze my feet to the floor. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, each beat loud and hollow. I pushed the door open. They didn't scream. They didn't scramble. Daniel was there, my husband, and with him was Rachel Davidson, my boss, naked, calm, unbothered. For a moment, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It felt unreal, like walking into the wrong apartment by mistake. Daniel turned first. His expression wasn't panic, it was annoyance. Rachel didn't even flinch. She just leaned back slightly, studying me with detached curiosity, like I was an interruption, not a devastation. The folder slipped from my hand. Papers scattered across the floor, contracts, signatures, numbers that would have changed everything, mixing with dust beneath the bed. Rachel smiled. You should have seen this coming, she said casually. You were never very strategic. Daniel finally spoke. We didn't plan for you to come home so early. That was the moment my chest cracked open. Not from the affair, but from the realization that this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a mistake. This was routine. Rachel stood, unhurried, pulling on her clothes. We're past pretending, she said. It's better this way. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand explanations. Instead, my body went cold, because lying there on the floor, half hidden beneath the edge of the bed, I saw something else. Emails, printouts, notes, my work, my algorithms. Rachel followed my gaze and laughed softly. You built something extraordinary, she said. You just never understood who would own it. That was when I realized the firing wasn't the betrayal. It was the setup. And I had just walked in at the end of their rehearsal. I don't remember leaving the room. I remember the feeling, though, the way my body went strangely weightless, like my bones had decided they were done holding me upright. I remember my hands shaking as I gathered the scattered papers from the floor, not because I needed them, but because standing still felt unbearable. Neither of them tried to stop me. That hurt more than shouting would have. Daniel didn't follow me down the hallway. He didn't call my name. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "This isn't what it looks like." He let me walk out of the bedroom the same way someone lets a door close on a room they're finished using. I sat in my car in the driveway for almost an hour. The steering wheel was slick under my palms. My breathing came shallow and uneven, like my lungs had forgotten their rhythm. I stared straight ahead, watching the house, our house, stand there quietly, unchanged, as if nothing inside it had just detonated my entire life. Shock is not loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It asks stupid, useless questions. When did this start? How long have they been laughing at me? Was any of it real? I kept replaying the smallest moments, Daniel's distracted nods, Rachel's sudden distance at work, the way both of them had known things before I did. The realization settled slowly, heavily. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had been studied. When I finally went back inside, Daniel was in the kitchen, fully dressed, pouring himself a glass of water like it was an ordinary afternoon. "We need to talk," he said carefully. I laughed once. The sound startled even me. "No," I replied. My voice was steady, which felt wrong. "You need to explain. Talking implies we're equals in this situation." His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." That word, dramatic, landed harder than the affair. Rachel appeared behind him, already composed, already back in control. "This isn't personal," she said, repeating the same phrase she'd used when firing me. "You're talented, Jane, but you don't have the instincts to protect your own work." I looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. That pause told me everything. "Long enough," Rachel answered for him. This wasn't impulsive. Something inside me finally went quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't collapse the way movies tell you women are supposed to when their marriages implode. I nodded. "I see," I said. I went upstairs, packed a bag with shaking hands, and ignored Daniel's half-hearted attempts to explain how this was for the best and how things just evolved. He followed me to the door, saying my name like it still meant something. I turned once. "You didn't just cheat on me," I said calmly. "You chose to become my enemy." He didn't understand then, but I did. And that was the beginning of the end. I moved into a studio apartment on the wrong side of Denver that night. Cracked walls, flickering hallway lights, a kitchen so small I could touch the sink and the stove without taking a step. It smelled like old paint and resignation. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the floor because there was no furniture yet, just silence and the distant sound of someone arguing 2 units over at 2 a.m. That's when the weight finally hit. Not as tears, but as pressure. Financial panic crept in first. The mortgage, the cars, the utilities still auto-drafting from my account. I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into reassurance if I waited long enough. They didn't. The next day, Daniel's parents called, not to ask if I was okay. They asked me to come over. Their mansion in Cherry Hills Village looked exactly as it always had. Immaculate, cold, designed to intimidate. Marble floors, imported art, fountains running like money had never been a concern in their bloodline. Harold poured himself bourbon at 10 a.m. Patricia sat straight-backed, pearls clicking between her fingers. They didn't invite me to sit. "This situation," Patricia began, "needs to be handled discreetly." Harold nodded. "You were never a good fit for Daniel. We warned him." They spoke like my marriage had been a failed investment, not a betrayal. Then Rachel arrived. Confident. Polished. Her hand rested possessively at Daniel's back when he followed her in. She wore a dress I had never seen before, expensive, intentional, chosen to remind me that she had already replaced me. Patricia smiled at her. "That's when I understood," I said quietly. "You all knew." Rachel didn't deny it. Daniel deserves someone who understands strategy. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let them explain how the AI system was company adjacent, how my late nights were misguided, how I should be grateful for the learning experience. Then I opened my bag. I placed the contract on the table. $25 million. Silence fell like a dropped plate. I signed this yesterday morning, I said calmly. Medical technologies, exclusive licensing. Rachel's smile fractured. Harold's glass paused midair. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. They didn't know. Rachel had been rushing the theft because she was losing control of the timeline. That realization steadied me. Back at the apartment, my phone rang again. This time it was Sarah Chen, my college friend, a forensic business analyst. Brilliant, direct, unafraid of messes. Get dressed, she said when I answered. You sound like hell. And no, you're not handling this alone. Within a week, she uncovered everything. Shell companies, embezzled funds, emails where Rachel and Daniel discussed my work like stolen property, expense reports funding their affair, timelines plotting my removal. This wasn't an affair gone wrong. It was a coordinated attack. And once I saw the scope of it, something inside me hardened. Not into rage, but resolve. Because if they thought humiliation would break me, they had gravely misunderstood who they were dealing with. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the quiet afterward. The days blurred into each other inside that cramped apartment. Morning light leaked through cheap blinds, cutting across peeling paint like it was trying to expose something rotten. I slept on a borrowed mattress on the floor, ate cold takeout straight from the box. Showered too long because the sound of running water was the only thing that drowned out my thoughts. At night, the doubts came. What if they're right? What if I really was naive? What if I handed them everything by trusting the wrong person? I replayed moments I had once found comforting. Daniel's hand on my back, his voice telling me I was brilliant, his insistence that I didn't need to worry about anything because he had me. Each memory felt contaminated now, like discovering a familiar place had been rigged with hidden cameras. There was a particular night when I almost broke. I sat on the floor with my laptop open, scrolling through old photos. Holidays, smiles, a life that looked convincing from the outside. I stopped at our wedding picture, the way Daniel looked at me then, admiring, proud, affectionate. I whispered, was any of this real? My chest tightened so hard I had to curl forward, pressing my forehead against my knees. I wasn't crying loudly. It was worse than that. Silent tears. The kind that feel endless because no one else can hear them. Sarah noticed. She showed up unannounced with groceries and a look that told me she wasn't leaving until I ate something real. We sat on the floor, backs against the wall, eating in silence. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, I admitted finally. They planned it. They studied me. What if they already won? Sarah looked at me for a long moment. You're allowed to be broken, she said. Just don't stay there. That night, after she left, I opened one of the email chains she'd uncovered. I read Rachel's words again. She'll never fight back. She doesn't have the backbone. Something shifted. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. They hadn't just underestimated my resilience. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. And that was their fatal error, because I realized something else in that darkness, sitting alone with my life in pieces. I had lost my job. I had lost my marriage. I had lost my home. But I hadn't lost my work. I hadn't lost the truth. And I hadn't lost myself. That was the moment I stopped mourning who I used to be and started preparing to confront who they thought I was. The turning point didn't come with shouting or grand gestures. It came with evidence. Sarah laid everything out across my small kitchen table. Bank statements, email chains, incorporation documents, expense reports, page after page of proof that what had happened to me wasn't just betrayal, but a calculated crime. Lancaster Innovations, LLC, she said, tapping the paperwork. Shell company, incorporated under Daniel's family name. They've been siphoning funds through it for over a year. I felt sick. Every late night, every missed dinner, every time Daniel had told me he was proud of me while secretly documenting my work for someone else. It gets worse, Sarah continued. Rachel used executive access to pull confidential files, employee records, your internal project timelines, things she had no right to touch. I closed my eyes. This wasn't personal ambition. It was exploitation. Sarah slid one last document toward me. Email timestamps. Conversations where Daniel reassured Rachel that I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be humiliated enough to disappear quietly. Something settled in my chest then. Not rage, but certainty. I want a lawyer, I said. She smiled for the first time in days. I know exactly who. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the office of Marcus Kim, a corporate attorney with a reputation that preceded him. His office overlooked downtown Denver, all glass and clean lines, like a place designed to remind people of how small they were about to feel. He read silently, page after page. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. "This," he said slowly, "is federal." He outlined it calmly. Conspiracy, embezzlement, intellectual property theft, breach of fiduciary duty. Not hypotheticals, provable charges. They didn't just hurt you, he continued. They built their future on the assumption that you wouldn't defend yourself. For the first time since that Tuesday, I smiled. Over the next 3 weeks, we prepared, not emotionally, strategically. Sarah worked 18-hour days compiling evidence. Marcus drafted filings that read less like lawsuits and more like indictments. We documented every transfer, every forged report, every lie. Meanwhile, Daniel and Rachel planned their engagement party. They sent me an invitation. Cream-colored cardstock, gold lettering. The audacity of it made me laugh. They wanted to humiliate me publicly, so I decided to let them. Because sometimes, the most powerful move isn't confrontation, it's timing, and I had never been more ready. I arrived at the engagement party alone, not because I had no one to bring, but because I wanted to walk in exactly as they remembered me. Quiet, unassuming, easy to overlook. The Lancaster estate glowed like a staged fantasy. String lights draped through imported trees, ice sculptures, servers in pressed white uniforms offering champagne I couldn't pronounce. Denver's social elite filled the space, laughing loudly, performing happiness the way people with money often do. Daniel stood near the fireplace, polished and confident, one arm loosely around Rachel's waist. She wore the diamond necklace he'd bought with stolen money, touching it often, as if afraid it might disappear if she didn't remind everyone it was real. Their eyes flicked toward me when I entered. Surprise! Then relief. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't causing a scene. Good, they thought. She came to watch. That was when David Park walked in. The room shifted instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phones appeared in hands. David Park, CEO of Medical Technologies, didn't belong to their social circle. He existed above it. He walked straight to me, took my hand. "Jane," he said clearly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm glad you came. I wanted to thank you personally for trusting us with your work." Rachel's smile froze. Daniel's face drained of color. David turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his voice. "For those of you who don't know, Jane is my business partner. The AI system she developed will redefine healthcare logistics across North America. Our initial investment is $25 million. You could feel the moment break." Rachel's champagne glass trembled in her hand. Daniel looked like he was about to be sick. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The following Monday, Marcus filed everything. Federal lawsuits, fraud charges, conspiracy, intellectual property theft. The timing was deliberate. Daniel and Rachel were served papers at brunch, surrounded by the same people who had toasted them days earlier. Phones were already recording when Rachel screamed, when Daniel tried to argue, when Harold demanded explanations no one could give him. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Emails, bank transfers, recorded conversations. Rachel unraveled on the stand, rage replacing composure. Daniel followed, trying to minimize, deflect, rewrite history. It didn't matter. The verdict came back in under an hour. Guilty. Watching them escorted out in handcuffs, I felt nothing dramatic, no triumph, no vengeance, just finality. Their power evaporated. Their supporters vanished. Their names became cautionary footnotes. And I walked out of the courthouse without looking back, lighter than I'd felt in years. 6 months after the trial, my life looked nothing like the one I had lost. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. I had stopped measuring success by stability alone. I stopped believing that safety came from staying small, quiet, agreeable. What I learned instead was that strength doesn't always announce itself. It waits, it prepares, and it moves when the moment is right. I launched Phoenix Ventures with $10 million of my own capital. Money earned, not inherited. The fund was built around one simple idea. Brilliant people are often betrayed by those closest to them, and too many of them are told to move on instead of fight back intelligently. We didn't invest in victims. We invested in survivors who refused to stay broken. Within a year, Phoenix Ventures was managing $75 million. We funded founders who had been pushed out by partners, stolen from by employers, or dismissed by families who never believed in them. People who had been underestimated the same way I had. The launch event was held at the Denver Art Museum. I stood there that night, looking out over a room filled with people who had rebuilt themselves from ashes and felt something close to peace. Daniel tried to reach out once from prison. I didn't reply. Some endings don't need closure. They need distance. Today, Phoenix Ventures supports dozens of companies with a combined valuation in the billions. Our waiting list grows every month, and every success story reinforces the lesson I learned the hard way. Betrayal only destroys you if you let it define you. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger or punishment. It's becoming so successful, so fulfilled, so unshakably grounded in your worth that the people who tried to erase you become irrelevant. If you're listening to this and standing in the wreckage of something you trusted, know this: you are not weak because you believed in someone. You are powerful because you survived what they tried to take from you. And when the time comes, you don't have to burn bridges. Just build something so strong that you never need to cross them again.